I'm betting, hoping that it doesn't go through, that we go back to having a vote on making sure there's no deal, and also trying to see whether we have an extension at a minimum.
But in terms of the economic bets that you would be placing as an investor, in terms of how you think the market is going to react and what industries you think are going to be most impacted on both ends of this?
Well, I think it really depends. I think there are some big sectors got the most exposure to what's going to go on into the EU. The auto sector, for example, huge integration of supply chains with Germany and France and Spain. I think we'll expect to see some movement there. And then, the industries where the regulatory frameworks are important, pharma, aerospace, food manufacturing. So see some movement there probably later today.
Is there any industry or is there any companies within those industries that are somehow inoculated from something happening here?
I think it's very hard for there to be complete inoculation. If you look at the degree of integration you've got for those industries, it's incredibly hard. Most of those sort of sectors have got 45 to 55% of their exports going to the EU. So no matter what happens, no deal, soft Brexit, the rules of engagement will change so dramatically. It's hard for things to stay as they are.
But I think the harder question for most investors is not just identifying which industries. I think we all actually know to some degree which industries are going to be affected or would be. The question is sort of, given that we don't know what the ultimate outcome is going to be, how do you play these industries? Are there any industries here you say I want to definitely be heavily invested in? Are you hedging? What's the move?
I think at the moment it's really just sitting on cash and trying not to play anything. The volatility has been so high. I think a lot of folks are just the risk of looking silly at the end of the day is just much too high to take really big bets. I think some, though, the banking sector, for example, the Bank of England has come through and said an extra $1 trillion of cushion sitting in the system. As soon as you see some stability, you'd expect to see that capital being released. So I think those kinds of sectors where there's a really sort of flip the switch change coming out of more certainty coming, I think you'd want to play those, but the macro ones are
What do you
tougher.
think the impact is here in the U.S.?
I think it's pretty minimal. I mean, if you look at the S&P, something like 1% of revenues from the whole index goes directly to the UK. I think it depends a little bit on what happens with some of the other big macro trends, whether the rest of Europe tips into recession. US, China, I think, is a much bigger needle mover.
Do you think this affects tourism and travel?
It's interesting you say that. I think Expedia came out relatively recently and said they've seen sort of a ticking down of some of the bookings to the UK.
Does that make any sense to you? I thought that had to, I would imagine that has to do with something else, not Brexit unto itself.
Yeah, I think if you actually look at the pound, I think if that continues to stay weak, there's a little bit of an uptick last night when the news came out that there was some movement, then you may see travel pick up if that weakness remains. But I think otherwise, I think it's sort of business as usual for a lot of travelers.